We're excited to have an advocate panel as part of our EPA theme. We're on an advocate panel here. So joining me right now to talk about Reset, Review, Reshape Policy Outlook panel are four people who spend a lot of time either in DC or thinking about DC and what goes on out there. And so you should give them your condolences for that. It's not a fun thing to have to do. But we're excited to have their insight, their experience, and their views of what's going on out there. Because when you're out here in the Midwest, we still try to pay attention to like facts and actual data and stuff like that, and they get to go out and deal with the Disneyland East. So joining me today on my right is David Cobb. David Cobb, Director of Federal Affairs for the National Biodiesel Board. Prior to NBB, David had worked at, I believe, CHS, S&P Global, and on several, or at least a few, Capitol Hill offices.
Yeah, former Senator Max Baucus of Montana, and Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana.
Okay. On my left is Ann Steckel. She's the founder of Ardent Strategies, which focuses on energy, ag, environment, transportation. Those seems like things that we somewhat pay attention to. And she's currently doing work with the National Farmers Union. Previously, Ann's worked on behalf of NBB, Growth Energy, American Farm Bureau, and also has spent time on Capitol Hill. So thank you for being here, Ann. Back to my far right is James Carsonson. James is, are you a native Iowan, or did you just work for Iowans? I couldn't remember.
Clinton, Iowa.
Clinton, Iowa. Well, that's kind of Iowa. And so James is a native Iowan, and he is the manager of federal government affairs for DuPont. Before DuPont, you spent about 20 years, I'll try not to embarrass you too much, working either for the campaigns or the official DC offices of, I believe, at least 4 different Iowa members of Congress.
Yes.
Okay, so he's had a lot of different perspectives as well. And then because his flight got delayed, back on my left is Jeff Cooper. So, well, I don't have anything better to do, I might as well do the panel. So, no, we're actually happy to have Jeff back. And we're going to ask him to expand on a few things he touched on briefly this morning. So that is our panel. I have a set of questions I want to get through. I'm going to direct them to one person, but they can all weigh in if they want to. They don't have to. If we do have time left, we will have some time for questions in the audience. It just depends on how long they talk. So basically, if they've all been in DC for 20 years, they've learned how to talk a long time like me, so they'll never, you guys are going to be left out. But no, we'll kick it off. And then I was supposed to tell you, I was going to do an icebreaker joke and ask them what their Super Bowl winner prediction is. And then someone pointed out that if you're in a building that has a sports book, that maybe that would be illegal and we shouldn't do that. So I'm not going to do any predictions, you're off the hook. But let's get serious. And we just came through a fight to try to rein in out of control refinery exemptions, to put certainty in a way they'd be reallocated. We came up short on certainty, but there is a pathway. How do you see that playing out as the EPA moves forward with the new refinery exemption process in 2020? But I'm also curious how you would see that playing out after the election, or maybe it's the same.
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. I mean, certainly small refinery exemptions are at the forefront of everyone's mind. It dominated much of 2019 and really for the past 3 years, right? Because we've had 4 billion gallons of renewable fuels that have been exempted out, which has really affected our industry in such a negative way, affected RIN prices, and just been a pull down in the entire growth of our industry that we all work for. And so it's something that we had worked so hard on trying to get those gallons reallocated. The National Farmers Union, who I represent, had been pushing for full reallocation of all of the gallons, and I know everyone else had been pushing for the reallocation as well. What we ended up with was, unfortunately, really half a loaf from what we even thought the deal was that we worked so hard to get, right? So now, instead of having the rolling 3-year average of what was done, we've got what the DOE is recommending to do. It's not quite what we wanted. To say we were all disappointed, I think, was putting it mildly. I share Monty's sentiment that we're trying to be work in a collaborative fashion as we look towards 2020 and what we can do with this administration. We know that the President has said that he continues to support renewable fuels, and we're very thankful for that. We just need to make sure that EPA is also being supportive of renewable fuels, and that we're really working to advocate and get out there and talk about our position with them a lot. 2020 hopefully will be better than 2019. The reallocation and getting the SREs going forward still has a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. We're optimistic that they will stick with at least what we came up with the DOE average, but we're going to have to stay after them. It's going to have to be a consistent advocacy effort. We think we've done a lot now, but we're not even towards the end, so we're just beginning.
So if I heard right, I think there's a good chance that at least in 2020, EPA will follow DOE. Does anybody radically disagree with that statement? I mean, I'm not saying it's certain, but it could happen. Anybody have any thoughts on what might happen after the next election? Will EPA continue to follow EPA recommendations?
Well, I think all bets are off then, and you know, without knowing how the elections are going to turn out, and you know, who may be the administrator at EPA, and where, you know, what allegiances they have, and where they're coming from. You know, I think the bottom line is it's going to remain a struggle to ensure that the volumes that are in the law are the volumes that are enforced by EPA. There are so many, you know, as I said this morning, so many clever ways for the refiners to find loopholes and gimmicks to try and undermine the program and avoid their compliance obligations. So whether it's SREs or whether it's, you know, general waivers or whatever, we're going to continue to fight you know, attempts by the oil industry to undermine this program.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that we've gotten assurances from EPA. I know it doesn't go very far necessarily, but we've gotten assurances, and we feel that you know, there's some credibility to it that they will stick by the DOE recommendations. Now, what those DOE recommendations are going to be, if they're going to ratchet up, that's certainly not helpful. But we do feel, at least right now, that they will stick by DOE recommendations.
Okay, David. So part of our battle this last year was making sure that when we had these RFS levels set, they didn't disappear out the back door through these exemptions. But it's also important that they set the right levels to begin with. On the ethanol side, that's more static. That's the 15 billion gallons. That's where Congress put it. On the biodiesel side, the EPA has always had more flexibility there. So I was disappointed with where they set the levels in the 2020 rule. As we look ahead to the rule they will propose and in theory finalize this year that would set the 2021 advanced and the 2022 biodiesel, what are you guys looking for? What do you think is possible, or how should this audience be thinking about that issue?
Yeah, so EPA has held us flat for the last two RFS compliance years at 2.43 billion gallons. We're doing 2.6 billion gallons right now. We've got 3 billion gallons in capacity. So we can do a lot more, and that's always been the battle with EPA, is that they've always lowballed what we can do. We don't have a number for what we're going to pursue for 2022. We're having our annual meeting in Tampa here next week. It's going to be one of the things that we talk about, but we will have to get that number to EPA here soon. I understand that Administrator Wheeler is already asking about the biodiesel number, and so we will get that to him. We will have conversations with him, because it's not just a matter of presenting the facts. There's a major political element to this too. So we're going to pursue both the administration and the Hill to bump up that number. But we're encouraged that we will get a higher number than 2.43 this next time around. You know, the EIA or Energy Information Administration released some numbers yesterday or a couple of days ago that they're predicting that biodiesel production will increase upwards of 15-16% just this year because of the passage of the Biodiesel Tax Credit. So we're hopeful.
All right. Yeah, it'd be nice to see the EPA get back to setting market-moving numbers, not numbers that lowball where the market already is. That's not how the RFS was supposed to work.
And Monty, on that note, you know, you're asking about next year's volumes. I mean, we have other issues that we're thinking about too, in terms of we were going to have a reset, then they pulled that back, and then we may have a whole set issue that comes up post 2022. So, you know, this whole industry really needs to be thinking in a forward manner about what we're going to do next year, but what we're going to do in the next following years, because EPA is really doing the groundwork now. They're having a lot of meetings with interested stakeholders. They're working with folks on Capitol Hill, and they're trying to figure out the best path forward. So we have a real opportunity, although it is an election year, and everybody grouses that there may not be a lot done in an election year. I think we as an industry have an opportunity to really put a forward-thinking plan in action for us.
Okay. Jeff, you had mentioned one lawsuit in your remarks this morning, in case some folks weren't here for that.
Right.
Could you you said that might be the most important one, but I know there's like about 23. It feels like it. Without going through all of them, what would maybe, is it just that one, or are there 2 or 3 we should keep our eyes on? What should the audience be kind of looking for on the legal front?
Sure, yeah, I did mention that we're involved in 4 lawsuits on the RFS currently. There are many more than that. In fact, I asked our attorneys, give me a summary of all the recent RFS litigation, and it was pages long because there's,
That's because they billed you by the page.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it is a great time to be a Clean Air Act attorney in D.C., I will say that. But I did mention the 10th Circuit case in my remarks earlier this morning, and in that case, we took EPA to court over 3 specific refinery exemptions that they gave. We believe that EPA did not show that those refineries had been disproportionately harmed economically as a consequence of their RFS compliance obligations. But the other thing that I think this case is really hinging on is the definition of extension. And it really kind of comes down to that one word. You know, our position and our argument is that unless you have, you know, if you're a small refiner and you have always gotten an extension continuously of your small refiner exemption after that blanket exemption ended in 2012, then yeah, you can qualify to submit a petition, and you know, if you meet the criteria, then you can get an exemption. If there was a break in there somewhere, if you didn't get an exemption as a small refiner in say 2013 or 14 or 15, and now you're going back to EPA asking for one, the law is pretty clear in our mind that you don't qualify to even you know, submit a petition. So the courts have heard oral argument on that case. You know, I just kind of reading the body language of the judges gave me optimism. They did respond well to our arguments. And we're really expecting a decision in that case any day, and it could have fundamental consequences for how EPA looks at this program. If EPA, you know, is told by the courts, hey, unless a small refinery has had an exemption continuously since that blanket expired, they can't get one. That knocks out a pretty, you know, significant number of the petitions that EPA has been receiving.
Is there another case? And if there's not, that's fine, because that way we
don't
talk about lawyers. But
several
others.
You know, I guess one that I would reference, we heard several comments, questions to Deputy Secretary Sensky about the transparency issue. We put a Freedom of Information Act request in to EPA almost immediately after Scott Pruitt started handing these things out to try and get more information about what's actually going on and what their process is and who's receiving these exemptions. And EPA effectively stonewalled us. We've gotten really no useful information out of that request, so we've taken them to court over their lack of response to our FOIA. And that's one that's moving along a little more slowly than we'd like. And then finally, we had a petition for reconsideration that was filed, you know, RFA and a number of other groups, you know, asking EPA to reconsider how it handles SREs retroactively. And again, we feel like they constructively denied that petition, so we took them to court on that as well. You know, now EPA is, you know, likely to ask for a dismissal of our motion because they're saying, hey, you know, you may not like what we did with the 2020 final rule, but we did address your request for us to look at reallocation of SREs. All
right. Well, as some people have said, there will be lawyers. So James, we haven't forgotten about you over there. He's trying to get away. You spent a lot of time in Congress working for different members, different perspectives. What do you think Congress may try to get done this year, if anything? And maybe it has to do with the RFS, carbon, octane. Obviously, we have different parties in control of the House and Senate. How do you see this year in Congress playing out with everything that's going on out there?
And if I discussed what I thought Congress won't get done this year, it'd take the whole hour, so we'll avoid that. It's an election year. The rule of thumb is in the first 2 months, get through about the end of April. If something's not in the works, it will get pushed to a lame duck session after the election. I think with biofuel policy, there's probably 3 potential areas of opportunity where Congress could get involved. Number one is as a watchdog of the EPA on the reallocation in the 2020 RVO. You talked about, do you trust the EPA? And President Reagan said trust but verify. So hopefully our biofuels champions will be the verification that EPA is following through with the reallocation of Department of Energy's waiver recommendations. And I think we talked about a push for transparency. That's, again, maybe a push in the appropriations process for that type of activity or that type of goal. We have 2 transportation laws that are expiring this year, surface transportation, water, WRDA. So there will be some type of infrastructure bill. I think the consensus is they're going to try and piece both together. It's an election year. You have an opportunity for a bipartisan push for some type of infrastructure bill. It's not the grand spending package that I think President Trump would have talked about last year. But I know within any infrastructure bill, what I've heard from some senators, they talk about making sure we have a infrastructure for electric vehicles, so charging stations. If we're going to push for charging stations, I think we have an opportunity to push for additional funding for biofuels infrastructure, so supporting USDA's work and putting some more might behind it. The third opportunity is more of a messaging bill because it would be only on the House side, the Democratic-controlled House. They are putting together a climate bill called the Clean Future Act. Several titles. It's being run through Energy and Commerce, Chairman Frank Pallone from New Jersey. But I think there's a good opportunity in those discussions and debates and with Hill engagements. I know a lot of you come in for fly-ins for different organizations, but I think it's a good opportunity to engage legislators that may not understand biofuels as much as we do, and to really push that there's no path towards a good, clean environment bill or without biofuels. Biofuels is a foundation that we have to have in any bill of that. And looking past 2020, it'll get nowhere in the Senate, Republican-controlled Senate, but we have to look at the long game, that this legislation most likely will be the blueprint for, should the Senate flip and the White House flip, that this would be probably a blueprint for legislation early on in 2021.
Okay, so watchdog, transparency, infrastructure is an opportunity, as well as the House on a messaging bill. Is there any other items that you think Congress may actually take up, anyone? Or is that James do a good comprehensive review? Okay.
Yeah, I think James covered it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's what they're talking about doing. We'll see what they actually do. So, Ann, back at you. I mentioned in my remarks earlier today, we're all very focused on the SRE reallocation, trying to make it certain. and take it out of the hands of EPA's having discretion. But that was part of a longer package, part of a longer list of commitments by the White House to biofuels to try to offset some of the damage done by the 4 billion plus gallons of SREs. One of the key things in that, outside of the SREs, was the commitment for EPA to undertake a rulemaking to address some labeling and regulatory restrictions on unleaded 88 or E15 that we think have really been holding back retailers from wanting to offer that fuel. They pledged to do it. They say they're going to do it. But just with the distrust that's out there, I get asked all the time, well, do you think EPA will do it? Or if they do it, will it actually be good? Or will it just be meaningless? What's your crystal ball on that?
That's a great question. That's a great question, Monty.
I'm mean to Ann. I'm giving her all the hard ones.
That's okay. I'm excited about it. And we are really excited about E15. I mean, that was a major step forward, right? Think about how long it took our industry to get there to have these year-round sales of E15. So although we talk about how 2019 was a tough year, that was definitely a shining moment for us. So definitely something to be excited about. Certainly there is a long laundry list of items that EPA has put on its to-do list for this year. I think E15 is probably right up there at the top, though, in terms of the labeling, namely because it's an election year. And that's a very big win. And if they've already said that they are going to do E15 year-round, I think that it naturally leads to this rulemaking and to this process of the labeling moving forward in a constructive manner. So I do think that EPA is working really constructively with us on that, and we will continue to have a very good dialogue with them. And again, it's an election year, so there's a lot of impetus to do things that will be winning issues for people in Iowa, and that certainly would be a winning issue for Iowans.
Yeah, and not doing it would certainly send a different signal.
Absolutely.
Jeff, you
Yeah,
look like
and I was just going to say, I mean, the boss said to do it, right? I mean, the boss said the deal includes streamlining these other regulatory burdens around E15. We too are hearing some signs of life at EPA that they're starting to take a look at how best to approach this issue. It should be fairly simple in our mind. You look at that bright orange and black label, and it's a deterrent. It truly is. We've got surveys and other information that show, consumers who haven't tried E15 that pull up to the pump and see that warning label, it does deter them from trying it. But there's more than that. I mean, there's a compliance survey that's costly to our industry and completely unnecessary. There's other just, burdens that are in the regulations that need to be cleared away. We are hopeful that EPA is, in fact, going to get around to that. FTC has a role in some of that too, so it's a little more complex than you'd think it would be. But we're hopeful that we're going to see that streamlining package sometime this year.
And I'll just add that, in the RFS supplemental rule that came out, EPA did kind of reverse course and say they're going to look into doing something on the ACE gallons, the 500 million gallons that need to be reincorporated into the fuel supply. I don't think that we'll see a proposal on that soon, but it'll probably be wrapped up in the next RFS rule.
Okay. David, sticking with you, another part of that, so you had the reallocation of SREs, you had the, hey, we're going to do something to help ease some of these regulatory burdens on E15, unleaded 88, and then you had the USDA commitment to rolling out an infrastructure package. Now, some of us lived through BIP, the Biofuels Infrastructure Partnership, which actually moved a lot of needles. So that, I mean, I don't say that critically. There were some challenges with it and how it was implemented, but that was focused, I think, solely, or at least mostly, if not solely, on the ethanol side of the equation. I believe we heard today that this is going to affect or be open to biodiesel as well. If that's what you're hearing, is that a retailer thing? Is that a distribution thing? How would you see a USDA infrastructure program working for biodiesel?
Yeah, and it will include biodiesel. I looked at the request for information this morning, and it does include biodiesel. We've been talking with the USDA for going back a couple of months now, kind of initial discussions of what our infrastructure challenges are. They're, of course, a good bit different from ethanol. I think that what we're going to focus our efforts on is money for our terminals, for pipelines, dedicated pipelines for biodiesel, as well as pipeline research as well, dollars for that. In fact, Scott Fenwick's out in the audience here. I'm tempted to bring him up here and talk about some other things that we're going to look at with this next program. But as you said,
we can put him on the agenda at 4:30.
But yeah, we're excited to have a crack at some of this funding. I know it was largely successful for E15 pumps, and so we're hoping to get something out of it for our distribution systems.
You know, we know the first time USDA did this in the previous administration, it was a 1 year, well, not 1 year because it took longer than that, but it was a one-time pool of money that was about $100 million. Has anyone heard what we think they might be doing this time and can share it, or maybe you know and can't share it, or maybe you can have a wild guess?
All I would say is more than that.
More than that.
But I don't think exact figures have been nailed down yet.
Okay.
But it sounds like it will be a multi-year program as well, so not just a one-shot deal. And like Dave, we see a lot of upside here. I think we have also the benefit of having been through this once and learning the lessons of what didn't work so well with the first version of the program. The states kind of were in charge of dispersing the funds and managing the program at the state level, and that created some challenges. We know that there were retailers that applied for these funds that never got them, or it was years later when they finally got around to dispersing those funds. So a lot of room for improvement, and we're very excited about a new program.
Okay. Jeff, Ann had mentioned reset and set briefly in the answer to one. I want to dig into that a little bit more. This morning I noted, and I think I've heard you and others say it, that we're so close to the end of the congressionally prescribed schedule for the RFS that runs through 2022. I mean, they're essentially doing the reset on an annual basis, so why not just roll out a couple more rules? But then that would bring a set. That's the way that we refer to what is the EPA going to do when it is given the broad authority and there's no longer a congressional schedule. Reset, set, how do you see that rolling out? What should happen? What do you think will happen? Those aren't always the same thing.
Well, I think what should happen with the reset rule, as I mentioned this morning, there was a proposal that was sent to the White House for review. It got hung up there, and we were happy it got hung up there based on what we were hearing about the reset. It would have been a disaster for us. It would have proposed lower volumes in 2021 and 2022. So the fact that got pulled back from the White House, we think is very good news. And what should happen to that thing? It should die a quick and painful or painless death. We don't see any reason to resurrect a reset rule. I think it's unlikely that it would happen in an election year because you're going to make somebody mad with that sort of proposal no matter what. It would be an unforced error on the part of EPA. So I think we've
never seen unforced errors in Washington, D.C.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
And I think they focus on the set, the post-2022 rule. According to the statute, they should have a proposal for that set rule out about a year from now. It's got to be finalized according to law by October of 2021. So, why are you going to screw around with a reset rule when the set rule is right behind it? So I think that's what's more likely, and we certainly have our hands full in shaping that rulemaking. It will be after the election, so who knows? The world may look different then. But it's going to be a heavy lift to make sure that the RFS remains a growth-focused, innovation-driving program that it was intended to be by Congress.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on reset or set, have a different view, or is Jeff?
No, that's what Jeff said.
Say the words, is Jeff right? But
all I can say is ditto. We fully agree.
Okay. Then we'll move back over here to James. We have a lot of senators running for president, and they've been out here talking to Iowans. and talking to farmers, talking to rural America, and personally, I've been pleasantly surprised with how much biofuels talk and kind of pro-ag talk there has been. That hasn't always been the case in either party. And it hasn't been an issue this year. Do you think, even though obviously you mentioned when we talked before, there's one nominee, but they go back, they're senators, do they take that back? Or if you're not the nominee, do you just kind of revert back to that home state point of view? Or how do you see this impacting maybe what Congress does this year or going forward with having several coastal senators having spent a lot of time here in our home state?
Yeah. So, right, as Emily Score pointed out earlier, they'll have one nominee and the rest will go back into their jobs in the Senate. I think that experience will stick with them. And if history is any indication, every one of those senators that's not the nominee thinks that they will be a nominee at some point down the future. So again, I look at engagement on biofuels as a long-term project. We have to think long-term, not just every RVO. So we're building a team of not necessarily experts, but supporters, people that understand that it's the carbon reducing liquid fuel solution. And it's good for the environment. It's a great price point for consumers. But I think the benefit is you've got some people that they're not going to be disciples of biofuels, but they're more open to it. They understand it better, and hopefully there's some understanding that they're willing to share with other senators and members of the House.
Okay, I thought it was an interesting point that even if they're not the nominee this time, most of them think they might be next time or whatever. So that's a good insight. Any other thoughts on that? On anything that you're seeing maybe trickling back to DC because of Iowa, or is it kept separate?
I think a lot of the education campaign that we're going through, even though we're all sick of, I'm from the Quad Cities, from Moline, Illinois. I did go to the University of Iowa, so if you're a Cyclone fan, don't hold it against me. But when I come back here, you're deluged, and you guys are with all the commercials and the process that goes through with all that. But it is an education campaign, right? And so that definitely has to go back to DC because people understand the importance of it. And if you're from the coast, you may not see the importance of it and how that affects you from the agriculture perspective or other perspectives that we see here at home. And so when they have the benefit of seeing it firsthand, then they can at least understand it and maybe, not, the most ardent supporters of it, but at least are neutral on it and understand how it affects our country. And certainly with the climate angle, I mean, that's something that we're laying the groundwork for right now, right? I mean, we're having these big discussions, and we're talking about how biofuels needs to be a big part of that. And nothing will likely happen this year, again, because it is an election year, but we are laying the groundwork for years to come, and all of that education will definitely pay off.
And I would just add, the field has narrowed considerably, obviously, but at one point was more than 30 people. We've had what, 16, 17, 18 of those original candidates visit ethanol plants. And there is no better way to educate someone who is going back to wherever they came from because they're no longer in the race than to let them kick the tires and talk to the people who turn the valves and run the control room about what those facilities mean to their community, to learn more about the fuel. So I do think that we have had an incredible opportunity to do that sort of education and have done good to capitalize on that. And
let me just make the point. Even more important than these senators and House members or those running for president, and Monty did not set me up for this compliment. Oh. The annual biofuels tour is so important because those are the staffers, the policy folks that quite often have never looked at biofuels policy before, understood it. Those are true That's a farm team that you're helping create. And I think, Jeff, you mentioned it in your remarks. They go back to those offices and talk about it, talk with their bosses, start to create converts towards biofuels. Some meetings that I've been in this past year, a California member that should have no interest in biofuels whatsoever, just based on their portfolio, their boss is actually engaging now because of that tour. So that, I think that's even more important than, just as important, if not more important. So.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, every year we do what's called the Iowa Biofuels Tour, where we invite staffers from DC, congressional staffers, agency staffers, had lots of people from EPA, USDA, the White House, House and Senate. We stick them in a bus for 3 days and take them to a farm, an ethanol plant, a biodiesel plant, value-added opportunities, livestock, things like that. And some of them, it's the first time they step foot into a soybean field or something like that. And thanks to the sponsors, if you're one of those out there, we can do that. But it is nice to hear that some of that does go back. We talked a little bit about the ones running for president. And what's the conventional wisdom in D.C. As we look past 2020? Who's going to control the House? I'm not asking who you think. I'll be nice. I'll let you hide behind conventional wisdom. But unless you want to go on the record. But D.C.'s a very political town. I worked out there for a few years, so everybody's out there making all their decisions based on what they think's going to happen. So what do people think's going to happen to the House and Senate, and how is that going to impact what can happen after 2020?
Yeah, I will definitely grab my crystal ball and look in it for this one, and my Ouija board and everything else, because it's very uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. The election, while it is this year, still is a long time away, so there's a lot of time between now and then for very dramatic, unpredictable things to happen. So it's difficult to say. You know, working in a divided government that we have now is good and bad. But I think generally speaking, the one thing that we have is the biofuels industry is that even if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, there is something for you to like about our industry. So no matter what happens from the political perspective, if the Republicans control the Senate and the White House, or that changes and the Democrats take control over that, I think we're still in a very good position because we have very strong support, certainly in Iowa. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the big things that I think all of us are really working on is putting that support out across the country and talking about the climate piece and things like that appeal to different parts of the country. So no matter what happens and what my crystal ball says, that our industry will end up good.
So who's going to control the House?
Okay, so
All right, you did.
No, that was a great,
you want in there, Jeff?
a great non-answer, and I'm going to give a non-answer too. I don't think it's.
Come on, have some fun.
Well,
it's okay.
I think the Senate. I think things stay generally the same they are today.
That'd be my guess, probably. Any strong disagreements?
No, it's terrible timing for this question, I have to say. I mean, the impeachment just started like an hour ago, so new information is being revealed by the hour, it seems like. So, I think the impeachment is really going to have a big impact on election day. But I would say that if the House is flipped or the Senate is, or we've got a Democrat in the White House, it lowers the chances of something major happening, I think, in the lame duck session, because whoever's coming into power is going to want to push the pause button until they come into office. That's the way I see it.
Okay.
Nathan Gonzalez, who's a political forecaster, he said he's not willing to predict anything, but he said the one prediction he'll stand behind is that this will be the highest turnout in a presidential year, probably maybe in history. So.
Okay. It'll be interesting. I like Ann's point, though, that there are things, sometimes we talk more about carbon, sometimes we talk more about jobs, but biofuels check a lot of boxes for a lot of people. You don't have to be excited about each one of the boxes they check to be excited about biofuels. So that has really helped us over the years. Jeff, somebody mentioned remand. That's been a pet peeve of mine because it's just so black and white. I thought about saying this in my remarks, so I'll say it now. For the life of me, I don't see why the Trump administration would double down on an illegal action that was taken during the Obama administration and take political damage from angry people like me saying this is so black and white. The Congress said do X, you did Y. The Second highest court in the land said, yeah, you shouldn't have done Y, go back and fix it to X. If I was the Trump administration, I would give those 500 million gallons back. I'd do it tomorrow. I'd do it in a way that wasn't funny math that made them kind of disappear, like cotton candy in your mouth, you know. And then I'd be saying, look what I did. You know, I fixed that Obama, and I don't remember who the vice president was then, but I fixed that problem. So put aside the politics unless you want to be risky and dive into it like I just did, but they're going to handle it next year. What's your crystal ball say handle is? I looked up the definition of handle, kind of could go either way. What do you think?
Well, that's a great question, and we are anxiously awaiting some more detail from EPA on what they meant in the final rule when they said they're going to address the remand in early 2020. And just to back up and maybe provide a little bit of history, what we're talking about here is back in 2016, EPA, after being late and missing deadlines on annual RVOs, finally put out three RVOs all at once, 2014 through 2016. And in that rule, they had this very convoluted logic that they used to waive those requirements lower. And for the 15 billion gallon conventional biofuel requirement in 2016, they reduced it to 14.5 billion gallons based on the logic, well, the market just can't handle more than that. It would have to go above the blend wall in order to get to 15 billion gallons, and so we're going to use a general waiver. We took them to court over that. The court found in our favor and said, yeah, EPA has not a leg to stand on and is violating the statutory intent of the program, and sent the rule.
Let me just interject to say this. I read a lot of court case decisions. That was one of the most sternly worded court, did I do that? Sternly worded court decisions that I've ever read. I mean, they were pretty blunt. Anyway,
it was.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and so, Monty's right. But the court remanded that rule back to EPA and instructed them to fix it and make that 2016 volume whole. Here we are in 2020, and EPA still has not done that. They have said over time, yeah, we'll get around to it, we'll get around to it. In the July proposal, they said, well, we did. We looked at it, and we decided we did the right thing the first time around. 14.5 was the right number, so we're going to stick with that. In this final rule, they have revisited that decision. They do say they're going to do something. We don't know exactly what that something may be. Really, you look at vehicles to move something, I mean, it's really the 2021 RVO would really be the first opportunity, we think, for them to build that volume back in. So it isn't exactly clear, but we're going to be paying real close attention to what happens there. We also have the ability to go back to the court.
That's what I'm about, writ of mandamus or something?
Yeah, it's called a writ of mandamus, a fancy Latin legal term, that basically, informs the court that, hey, 3 years ago, you told EPA to fix this. 3 years later, they still haven't done it. You need to haul them back into this court and, hold them in contempt, essentially. So we are considering whether that's something we can do. We're a little bit worried that EPA may be able to say, oh, no, look, we said in this final rule that we're going to get around to it.
Of course, 3 annual RVOs have been finalized since the court remanded it back to them. So they've had 3 opportunities.
Yep.
I just think it's so black and white that, we're looking at trust building. I said this a long time ago, before the SREs thing even popped up. I said, man, if we can't get justice on this, we're in trouble.
And if you look at EPA's rationale for not building that 500 million back in, it just makes your blood boil. They say, well, look, if we dropped another 500 million gallons of RV, blending requirements on top of the RFS, that would be a real burden for the refiners. That might be hard for them to comply with. And it's like, well, gosh, I didn't know the RFS was designed to be easy for the refiners.
And hard to understand when there's billions of RINs and the giant RIN piggy bank in the sky.
Precisely.
All right. Well, I hope we can get some action on that. And if they do, I'm ready to say, good job, job well done. So I hope that's what we can do. For the audience, I've got a couple more questions. But in about 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to have time for a few from the audience. If you want to make your way to a microphone there, if you don't mind hanging out for a little bit. David, biodiesel tax credit.
Yes.
Normally that'd be much higher up on my list, but the miracle happened. Congress actually not only reinstated the biodiesel tax credit, but through what I think Senator Grassley referred to as a Christmas miracle, extended it out a few years. What does it mean? What went into that? Or if you want to share any behind-the-scenes stuff, or more importantly, what does it mean going forward to have that out a few years?
Yeah, so it was a 5-year extension that we got. It was part of a tax package that was added to one of the 2 appropriations bills that Congress passed right before they left town in December. And it's 2-year retroactive. It covers 2018 and 2019 activities, and then 3 years forward. And it's the first time we've had that much of a prospective tax credit ever. I mean, going back to 2005, the first time it was enacted into law, we had about 2 years credit on that. So it's the longest period of business certainty that our industry has had, and we are just thrilled about it. If history's any guide, this past year, with the tax credit being expired for 2 years, our industry only grew by about 100 million gallons. But in the years that we actually had prospective credit in 2016, 2013, we grew by upwards of 400 million gallons. So it works. Strangely enough, this credit works quite well, and so we're just thrilled about the prospect of having that kind of business certainty for this long a period of time. How it came about, it's a lot of shoe leather. This was the most furious lobbying campaign that I've ever been a part of or have ever even seen. We used every advocacy tool in our toolbox and then some. I mean, like congressional fly-ins. Most associations will only bring their folks in to storm Capitol Hill to advocate maybe once or twice a year. We did that probably 6 times. Last year, we had a whole media strategy. We had, ads in the Washington Post. We had press conferences in front of the Capitol building. We papered the Hill with letters. The last letter that we sent to the Hill had about 150 organizations, trade associations, companies, Farm Bureau, Farmers Union were on the same letter for once. So it was a powerful signal to our folks, and we had to do all of that lobbying ahead of time because these tax packages can come together lightning fast, and that's exactly what happened this time around. All of our work throughout the entire year boiled down into about a 48-hour period of time. I'd say December 15th, 16th, that was a Sunday and Monday before they were supposed to head out. We had gotten word that Sunday that there was an agreement in principle on a tax bill and that it would ride on one of these appropriations bills the coming week. But by Monday night, about 5 o'clock Monday night, the text of those appropriations bills was released, and we weren't on it, and we were just starting to panic. But we understood that the tax committees and leadership were still working on a tax bill and that it could be added later in the process, could be added in the Rules Committee in the House. And so we were relieved we had a little bit of time, and we needed every bit of it because the negotiations went on into the wee hours of the night. And this is where your senators here really saved the day. Obviously, Senator Grassley, chairman of the Finance Committee, was one of the very few people in the room that was actually hammering out this deal. He was the one that said biodiesel is going to be in this deal, and not only be in it, but it's going to be in it at a multi-year extension. And so he was there as our primary champion, but the White House got involved when they found out that there was going to be a tax package, and they started digging around into it, and there were some things they didn't like about it, electric vehicles and so forth. And so there was a threat that the president was going to, torpedo the whole thing. And so Senator Ernst actually called President Trump himself late that night, Monday night, and informed him of the importance of this credit and that this needs to go forward. And she talked him back from the edge, and so it happened. And so your delegation, as well as your House delegation, Abby Finkenauer introduced the legislation to extend the credit in the House. Congresswoman Axney, Congressman Losack, they were constantly in the ears of the chair of the Ways and Means Committee and the Speaker and Leader Hoyer almost every day last year. And if it wasn't for your delegation, this would not have happened. So I would encourage you to please say thank you to your delegation next time you see them.
All right, that is great. Yeah, I mean, at one point in time, I heard we were in, but it was just like up to December, and then it was out, and then all of a sudden we came back, and while other things were being taken out of the bill, we actually got extended further, which
Yeah.
I think was the only credit that happened to. So.
Yeah, well, the short line railroads also got a multi-year extension, but those
I
two
have
are
a
the
joke
only
on
ones.
that, but I'm not going to say it in front of the whole audience.
Well,
I'll tell you that later.
Yeah, we were the only two that got a multi-year extension.
There's a connection. We're going to wrap up my first round of questions with a question to James. I see a couple folks there. We'll be right to you after this. I'll also maybe ask my staff to give me some sort of indication in the next there's somebody, of if our next speaker is here yet. Okay, so we're going to wrap up on time, but we'll take 2 questions from the audience after this one. James, earlier you mentioned that maybe a messaging bill, the Clean Future Act or whatnot. I know that a lot of groups that I work with have been working on a low carbon octane bill. Is that part of it? Could it be part of it? Do you see, just as you look to the future, carbon, octane, aromatics, what do you think our industry could do or should be doing to position ourselves going forward?
Yes, everything.
Okay, all right,
I mean,
moving along.
Look, again, we're play the long game, and different legislative proposals are going to have appeal with different constituencies on the Hill. So I think anything that gets us recognition and again, repetitive acknowledgement that we are the solution to a climate bill or any climate policy. We are a foundational solution is a good thing. So.
Okay.
If I can just tag on
Sure.
to that too, I don't think
Real
we can,
quick, please.
If we can underscore, I will real quick to it. I don't think we can underscore the importance of what we heard about this morning about aromatics and octane. I think that was an excellent presentation. We really have gathered the scientific evidence that we need. We see that there's a strong interest on the octane front. We know about aromatics, and so making that connection and at some point laying the groundwork for Congress to follow through with that will be incredibly important. They had hearings on octane last year. We know that there's some interest in this issue from the legislative perspective, and it definitely will be a point of interest moving forward.
That's great. I wasn't trying to be rude, but we have an important speaker after us. So a concise question, Mr. Coleman Jones.
Well, you took some of my question there. I was going to ask you about octane because it was pretty silent on octane this morning. But I'll ask Jeff and Monty, what do you see as next steps on octane? And how can other entities, and you might recognize me as being from General Motors, help?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Coleman. And of course, we've been talking a lot over the last few years about how to move the ball forward on the octane question. There was a legislative proposal last year. It's been, I guess, 2 years ago, and it was reintroduced last year, around a 95 RON octane standard. There were parts of that legislation that we liked. There were parts of it we didn't like, namely that it would have phased out the renewable fuel standard in 2023. But we do see, there is an appetite, I think, amongst the refiners, amongst the autos to figure out a creative way to move forward on something that's going to make our liquid fuels more efficient. And that means a higher octane. So we have been working with members in the House, Congresswoman Bustos from Illinois in particular, around kind of taking up the pieces of the Shimkus bill that we liked, putting aside the pieces we didn't like, and kind of building a low carbon octane standard. Because again, there's ways to raise octane that are not healthy for our planet and our consumers. We're afraid that if we have a 95 standard with no guardrails or no means of anti-backsliding, that the refiners just dump more aromatics in the gasoline and make it even dirtier. So, if we can build policy solutions that ensure the way that we raise that octane is with clean sources of octane, renewable sources of octane, we're on board and we're ready to go. And I do think there's a path forward and happy to continue working with the autos and refiners and the environmental groups on that path forward.
You mentioned me, Coleman, so I'll just add one extra thought to what Jeff said. My focus as I look at those, not my only focus, but a focus that I want to make sure is addressed, is our ability to participate in a larger percentage of the tank with the FFE credit's gone. We're seeing FFE production plummet. That's something we'd like to turn around. But whether it's FFEs, whether it's E30, E25, whatever certification, if no octane standard, no carbon standard is going to move our industry forward unless we can actually participate in more of the tank than 15%. These things are not technology neutral if we're capped at 15% of the solution. So as I look at these, I'm always going to be able to be looking a little bit at the tank and saying, hey, is there a component in here that lets, you know, I'm not saying you have to mandate that we make up that octane, right? But if we're capped at 15%, we're not going to make up more of that octane. So we have to have that ability to participate. I've got the governor waiting, and I've got one more question.
We really support that because ethanol is the low-cost octane, and for a high-octane future, we need a fair price for the customer.
Yeah, and exactly. So, I mean, we could be a very attractive octane solution. We could be a very attractive carbon solution. But if the vehicle requirements don't let us go beyond 15, we're not going to be the solution.
Yeah, so Coleman, you asked how you could help keep making FFEs or start making them again. That would be the single most important request we'd have for the outcome.
I promised this gentleman I get to him, so I want to do that. But yeah, I mean, if you look at what's gone on in California, where there's a price on carbon that makes ethanol look good, and you have an FFV fleet that has not completely gone away yet, your slide was very, people should take note of what E85 sales are doing in California. Very quickly, sir, we're at about a minute and a half for both the question and the answer.
I won't be able to preface anything, so I won't. My question is, why can't I buy a flex fuel hybrid vehicle? Why can't I buy an Asian or European vehicle of any form in this country on flex fuel? Why don't we require all vehicles manufactured and sold in the U.S. to be flex fuel? Secondly, why aren't we building bridges with groups like the Sierra Club that are concerned about air and water quality and don't like the fossil fuel industry either? Third, over noon now, reading the ACE magazine, Dave Vandergreen comments that in exchange for being able to do E15 and keep 85, ineffectively we have banned the mid-range blends that are not E15 or not 85, and that a retailer with a blender pump could be doing something that's not quite legal.
All right.
And then last question is, when we're doing what we're doing with ethanol and gasoline, and we look at the aromatic hydrocarbons, our blending process, even at higher plants, we're diluting aromatic hydrocarbons. We're not substituting, and that's where we should be going. So there's my first 4 of the body.
And time's expired. Who wants to take a shot at any one of those 4 very, very briefly?
I'll just say that the National Biodiesel Board has been reaching out to the environmental community for well over a year now to educate them on the benefits of our fuel.
Any last words?
Thanks for coming.
All right. Well, most of what you said, I think a lot of us up here agree with. We'd like to see more FFEs. We'd like to figure out a way to make that happen. It seems like if it's not one roadblock, it's another. Any final comments?
Well, no, I'd like you two to meet Coleman Jones from General Motors. He's the guy that you should ask that question. The answer we get is they're not getting credits toward their fuel economy compliance anymore, and that's why they're not making FFEs. But yeah, you should talk to Coleman.
And we'll give you the last word.
I think you're asking all the right questions, and obviously everyone here is very interested. And thank Monty for putting this great panel together, and for everybody coming.
And we are working with the environmental groups. There's just there's some distrust there on their side, and it's
has to be a two-way street.
Yeah, but we're working on it.
Yeah. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming here on a nice warm day in sunny Iowa in August, and appreciate that. I know that the only reason it was worth your time coming here is because at least you aren't in Washington, D.C. With that, let's give our panel a round of applause.